Elias Thorne lived in a house that most people only saw in movies. It sat high on a hill in Beverly Hills, surrounded by tall iron gates and guarded by cameras that blinked red like sleepy eyes. The driveway alone was long enough to make your legs tired if you walked it. Palm trees lined the path, perfectly trimmed, and the grass was so green and even it looked painted. Inside, everything gleamed, marble floors that echoed when you walked, crystal chandeliers that caught the California sun and threw rainbows across the walls, and furniture so soft and expensive you almost felt guilty sitting on it. Elias had built all of this himself. He hadn't been born rich. He'd grown up in a small apartment with a single mom who worked double shifts at a diner just to keep the lights on. Back then, he'd dreamed of a life where he never had to worry about money again. And now, at 48, he'd done it. His tech company, something about artificial intelligence and data clouds, had made him a billionaire before he turned 40. He owned yachts, private jets, and even a small island in the Caribbean that he'd never visited. But for all his success, Elias was a man who liked order, silence, and control. He didn't like surprises. He didn't like mess. And he especially didn't like people who talked too much or asked for things. His household ran like a well-oiled machine. There were 20 people who worked for him, chefs, gardeners, security, drivers, cleaners. But they all knew the rules. Be invisible, be efficient, and never, ever make yourself noticed unless asked. Elias preferred it that way. He didn't want to know their life stories. He didn't want birthday cards or holiday greetings. He paid well, and in return he expected professionalism, not friendship. Among them was a woman named Grace. She was 58, with silver threading through her dark hair and hands that looked older than her years, knuckles slightly swollen, skin dry from years of scrubbing, washing, and polishing. She'd been with Elias for 3 years now, hired through a discreet agency that specialized in long-term domestic staff for high-net-worth individuals. Grace never missed a day. She arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, dressed in her simple gray uniform, hair neatly tied back, shoes polished. She cleaned the east wing of the house, the guest rooms, the library, the sunroom without making a sound. She folded towels so perfectly they looked like they belonged in a luxury hotel. She dusted shelves so high you needed a ladder, and she never knocked over a single thing. Most days, Elias barely registered her presence. She was part of the background like the hum of the air conditioner, or the soft rustle of the curtains in the breeze. He'd pass her in the hallway and give a slight nod, maybe a quiet good morning, and that was it. She never looked him in the eye for long. She never lingered. She did her work and disappeared. But Grace had a life outside those marble walls, though Elias didn't know it and probably wouldn't have cared if he did. Back in a small village in Limpopo, South Africa, 3 children waited for her letters and the money she sent every month. Her daughter, the mother of those children, had died 2 years ago from complications during childbirth, a tragedy that could have been prevented with better medical care. But the nearest hospital was hours away, and the ambulance never came in time. After that, Grace had made a promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to keep her grandchildren safe, fed, and in school. So she'd left. At 55, with no savings and only basic English, she'd taken a job overseas through a cousin who knew someone who knew someone. The pay was good, more than she'd ever earned in her life. But it came at a cost. She missed the smell of rain on red earth. She missed the sound of goats bleating in the morning. She missed holding her grandchildren while they fell asleep. Instead, she lived in a small room above the garage, clean, quiet, and lonely. Her only window looked out at the pool, not the sky. Every month, she sent 80% of her salary home. The rest covered her modest needs: soap, a pair of new shoes once a year, a phone plan so she could call the kids on Sundays. She never bought herself coffee from the fancy machine in the kitchen. She never took leftovers unless they were clearly meant to be thrown away. She ate plain rice or bread with tea, usually late at night when no one was around. She told herself it was fine. She'd lived through worse. During droughts back home, her grandmother used to chew on young grass to calm an empty stomach. It wasn't food exactly, but it helped the hunger feel less sharp, less desperate. It was a trick from childhood, a memory of survival. One Tuesday in late spring, the air was thick with heat. The gardeners had just finished trimming the hedges, and the scent of cut grass hung in the air like perfume. Elias had been working outside all afternoon, reviewing plans for a new AI campus on his tablet, seated under a wide umbrella by the koi pond. He liked the garden. It was peaceful, orderly, and full of color. Roses, lavender, jasmine. Everything bloomed on schedule, just as he liked. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement near the herb patch. He frowned. It was past 4 p.m. The staff should have been finishing up, not lingering. He looked closer. It was Grace. She was crouched low near the edge of the lawn where the ornamental grasses grew wild. Her back was turned to him, shoulders slightly hunched. And she was eating something. He squinted. Was that grass? His first thought was confusion, then irritation. What on earth was she doing? Was she sick? Had she lost her mind? He'd never seen anything so strange. He stood up, tablet in hand, and walked toward her, his loafers sinking slightly into the soft soil. Grace? He called, voice sharp with surprise. She froze instantly, like a deer caught in headlights. Slowly she turned, her face pale. In her hand was a small handful of green blades. Her lips were slightly stained with green juice. She dropped the grass as if it had burned her. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, rising quickly, brushing dirt from her uniform. Her eyes darted to the ground. I didn't mean... I won't do it again. Do it again? Elias asked, arms crossed. Are you eating the grass? She didn't answer right away. Her throat moved as she swallowed. She looked like she wanted to vanish into the earth. It's nothing, sir, she whispered. Just a habit from home. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Before he could say another word, she turned and hurried away, her steps quick and light, as if she were afraid the ground might crack beneath her. Elias stood there, stunned. He looked down at the crushed blades of grass on the soil. They were young wheatgrass planted for aesthetics, not consumption. He'd never even considered that someone might eat it. The whole thing felt surreal, almost disrespectful. This was his garden, his sanctuary. And now it felt invaded. He went back to his chair, but he couldn't focus on his tablet. His mind kept circling back to Grace's face, the shame in her eyes, the way her hands had trembled. He told himself it was none of his business. She was an employee. If she was acting strangely, maybe she needed time off. Or maybe she was unwell. He'd mention it to the house manager tomorrow. Let someone else handle it. But that night, as he sat alone in his vast dining room eating a perfectly plated meal prepared by his chef, seared salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of expensive wine, he couldn't shake the image of Grace crouched in the grass chewing quietly, like a secret. He thought about how she always ate last, if at all, how she never asked for anything, how she moved through the house like a ghost, careful not to leave a trace. For the first time in years, a question crept into his mind, one he hadn't allowed himself to ask before. What is her life really like? He pushed the thought away. Billionaires didn't get where they were by getting soft, by caring too much. He finished his wine, set the glass down, and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. And in the small room above the garage, Grace lay awake too, heart pounding, wondering if she'd just lost the only thing keeping her grandchildren alive. Elias woke up the next morning with a headache, not from wine, but from thoughts he couldn't shake. He showered, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, and went downstairs expecting his usual quiet breakfast. Black coffee, a boiled egg, and the morning news on the tablet. But the image of Grace crouched in the garden kept flashing in his mind like a glitch in an otherwise smooth system. It didn't fit. It didn't make sense. Why would someone eat grass? Was she ill, starving? Or was it something cultural he didn't understand? He tried to ignore it. He had a video call with investors in Tokyo at 9, a new product launch to review, a charity gala to RSVP for. His life was full of important things, things that mattered. And yet, as he sipped his coffee, his eyes drifted toward the hallway where the staff entered. He hadn't seen Grace all morning. At 10, he called for the house manager, a calm, efficient man in his 50s who'd worked for wealthy families for decades. About Grace, Elias began, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the pool. Did you see her yesterday afternoon? In the garden? The house manager nodded slowly. Yes, sir. She mentioned she wasn't feeling well. Said she needed a moment outside. She was eating grass, Elias said flatly. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't react with shock. Instead, he looked thoughtful. I see. Do you know why? Elias asked. I don't, sir, but if I may say, Grace has never once called in sick. Never asked for a raise. Never complained about hours. She's one of the most reliable staff we've ever had. That only made Elias more uneasy. He dismissed the man but couldn't let it go. By lunchtime, he'd made up his mind. He wouldn't fire her. Something in his gut told him that would be wrong, but he needed to understand. So instead of eating in the dining room, he went to the kitchen himself, something he almost never did. The kitchen was quiet. The chef had already prepared his lunch and left it covered on the counter. But as Elias lifted the lid, he noticed something. A small bowl of plain rice sitting on the edge of the sink. Cold. Uncovered. No fork. Whose is this? He asked the kitchen assistant, a young woman who jumped when he spoke. Oh, that's Grace's, sir. She didn't have time to eat earlier. She said she'd grab it later. Elias stared at the rice. It was just rice. No oil, no seasoning, nothing. He remembered her thin frame, the way her uniform hung slightly loose on her shoulders. He'd assumed it was just her build. Now he wondered. That afternoon he did something unusual. He walked through the east wing, the part of the house Grace cleaned. He hadn't been in those rooms in months. The library smelled faintly of lemon polish. The guest beds were made with hospital corners. Every surface gleamed. It was perfect. Too perfect. It felt empty, like a museum. Then he saw it. On the windowsill of the sunroom, tucked behind a potted fern, was a small, worn notebook. It wasn't supposed to be there. Staff weren't allowed personal items in guest areas. Curious, he picked it up. It wasn't a diary, just a ledger. Dates, amounts, names. Thabo, school fees, $120. Naledi, shoes, $45, clinic deposit, $300. And at the bottom of each page, a running total in a different color pen, always subtracting, never adding much. His chest tightened. He flipped to the last page. At the top, in shaky handwriting, operation needed. $25,000, God help me. He closed the book gently as if it might break. He didn't know who Thabo or Naledi were, but he didn't need to. The truth was staring him in the face. Grace wasn't eating grass because she was strange. She was doing it because she was hungry, and she was hungry because every dollar she earned was going somewhere else, somewhere far away, to people who needed it more than she did. That evening, instead of working, Elias sat on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in oranges and purples. He thought about his own childhood, how his mother would skip meals so he could eat, how she'd patch his shoes with glue and duct tape, how she'd cry quietly in the kitchen after he went to bed. He'd promised himself he'd never let anyone he loved suffer like that again. But Grace wasn't family. She was staff, and yet, wasn't she human? Didn't she deserve to eat a real meal? To not have to chew on grass just to quiet the ache in her stomach? The next morning, he made a decision. He woke up early before sunrise and went to the kitchen himself. He boiled water, made strong tea with honey, toasted 2 slices of whole grain bread, scrambled eggs with a little cheese, and sliced an apple. He arranged it all on a tray with a cloth napkin. It wasn't fancy, but it was real food. Good food. Then he walked to the small door near the garage, the entrance to the staff quarters. He'd never been up there. He knocked softly. No answer. He knocked again, louder. After a long pause, the door opened a crack. Grace stood there, eyes wide with fear. She was still in her nightgown, hair loose, face pale. "Sir?" she whispered, voice trembling. "Is everything all right?" Elias held out the tray. "I brought you breakfast." She didn't move. She looked at the tray like it might explode. I can't accept this," she said quickly. "I'll come down and make your breakfast right away." "I already ate," he said gently. "This is for you." She hesitated, then slowly opened the door wider. Her room was tiny, just a bed, a small dresser, a chair, and a shelf with a few photos. One showed 3 children smiling in front of a mud brick house. Another showed a young woman holding a baby, her daughter, Elias guessed. He set the tray on the chair. "Sit," he said, not as an order, but as a request. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Eat," he said. She picked up a piece of toast, her fingers shaking. She took a small bite, chewed slowly as if she wasn't used to tasting real food. "Who are Thabo and Naledi?" Elias asked softly, her eyes filled with tears. She looked down. "My grandchildren," she whispered. He waited. After a long silence, she spoke. Her voice was low but clear. "My daughter. She passed 2 years ago. During childbirth, the baby Thabo lived, but his heart, It's not strong. The doctors say he needs surgery. But it costs too much. She swallowed hard. I send money every month. For food, for school, for medicine. But the surgery, I've been saving. For 3 years. Still not enough. Elias didn't say anything. He just listened. I don't want charity, she added quickly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I work hard. I'm grateful for this job. Sometimes when the money is tight, I skip meals. The grass. My grandmother taught me. It helps. It's not hunger, just emptiness. And it reminds me of home. Elias felt something crack open inside him. Something he'd kept sealed for years. He'd built walls around his heart to survive, to succeed. But now, standing in this small room with a woman who carried the weight of an entire family on her shoulders, those walls felt foolish. Pointless. You don't have to skip meals, he said finally. Not here. Not ever again, she looked up, confused. Sir, you're part of this household, he said. That means you eat what we eat. You rest when you're tired. You ask for help when you need it, she shook her head. I can't ask. I'm just staff. You're a person, he said firmly. And people deserve to be treated like people. She didn't argue. She just nodded, tears spilling over. She picked up the apple slice and ate it slowly, savoring it like it was gold. Elias stayed until she finished the whole tray. Then he said, I'm going to help with Thabo's surgery. Her head snapped up. No, please, you don't have to. I want to, he interrupted. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you've carried this alone long enough. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She just covered her face with her hands and cried. Quiet, deep sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far inside. Elias didn't touch her. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just stood there bearing witness to her pain, her strength, her love. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about the next steps. As he walked back to the main house, the morning sun warm on his face, Elias felt different, lighter somehow. Not because he'd done something grand, but because he'd finally seen someone, not as a role, not as a function, but as a human being with a story, a heart, and a quiet kind of courage that humbled him. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He just felt like a man who'd finally remembered how to be human. The next morning, Elias didn't go to his office. He didn't check emails or join the usual stream of calls that filled his days. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a notepad, writing down everything Grace had told him the day before. Thabo, heart condition, surgery, $25,000, Johannesburg, clinic name scribbled on a receipt she'd kept in her notebook. He read it over and over as if the words might change, but they didn't. The need was real. The urgency was real. And for the first time, so was his responsibility. Not as a boss, but as someone who could actually do something. He called his personal assistant early, before 8. Cancel everything today, he said. All meetings. All calls. I'm not available. There was a pause on the other end. Sir, the board is expecting your input on the Singapore expansion. Reschedule it. Elias said, voice firm but calm. Tell them it's personal. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. For years his word had been law, and today was no different. Except now the reason behind his command wasn't business. It was human. After the call, he walked to Grace's room again. This time she was already dressed, hair neatly tied back, uniform pressed. She looked tired but composed, like someone who'd cried all her tears and now had work to do. I'm not here to stop you from working, Elias said before she could speak. But I need to ask you a few things about Thabo's medical situation. She nodded slowly, stepping aside to let him in. The room was spotless, as always, but now it felt different. Less like a hiding place and more like a home, however small. The photos on the shelf seemed to watch them quietly. Elias sat on the chair while she perched on the edge of the bed. He asked gentle questions. What kind of heart problem did Thabo have? When was he diagnosed? Had he seen specialists? Grace answered carefully, her voice steady now, as if speaking about her grandson gave her strength. He was born with a hole in his heart, she explained. The doctors call it a ventricular septal defect. In the city, they say it can be fixed with surgery. But in our village, we don't have that kind of hospital. The nearest one with the right equipment is in Johannesburg. We went there last year. They gave us a date, but we couldn't pay the deposit. So they put us on a waiting list. But the list is long. And Thabo gets tired so easily. He can't run like the other children. Sometimes his lips turn blue. Elias listened, his chest tight. He thought of his own childhood. Playing soccer in the street until dark, climbing trees, never once worrying if his heart would give out. The unfairness of it all settled over him like a heavy coat. "Do you have the clinic's contact information?" he asked. Grace reached into the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, covered in nen, oats in both English and her native language. She handed it to him with trembling fingers. He took it carefully, as if it were sacred. "I'm going to call them today," he said. "I'll arrange the surgery." Full payment. No waiting. Her eyes widened. "But, sir, you can't just—" "I can," he interrupted gently. "And I will. This isn't charity, Grace, it's justice. You've worked hard for me for 3 years. You've kept this house running while carrying a burden no one should carry alone. Let me help." She didn't argue this time. She just nodded, tears welling again, but she didn't look away. There was a new kind of dignity in her eyes, not pride, but acceptance. She was allowing someone to see her need, and that in itself was an act of courage. By noon, Elias had spoken to the clinic in Johannesburg. The administrator was stunned when he offered to pay the full amount up front, $2,500, including post-op care. "Are you family?" the woman had asked. "No," Elias replied, "but I'm responsible." He didn't explain further. He gave his credit card details, confirmed the payment, and requested that Thabo be scheduled for surgery within the week. The woman promised to call Grace directly with the appointment details. When he hung up, he felt a strange mix of relief and awe. Money had always been a tool for him, something to build, to grow, to control. But today it felt like a bridge. A way to connect two worlds that had never touched. His world of glass towers and private jets, and Grace's world of red earth and children who dreamed of running without getting tired. That afternoon, Grace received the call. Elias was in the garden when he saw her come outside, phone pressed to her ear, hand over her mouth. She stood by the rose bushes, tears streaming down her face, nodding over and over. When she hung up, she turned and saw him. She didn't say a word. She just walked over and knelt on the grass, right where she'd been eating blades just 2 days before, and bowed her head. Elias didn't let her stay there. He reached down and gently helped her up. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank yourself. You're the one who never gave up." She shook her head. "I couldn't have done this alone. No one should have to," he said softly. Over the next few days, everything moved quickly. Grace needed to fly home to be with Thabo before the surgery. Elias arranged a first-class ticket, not because he wanted to show off, but because she deserved comfort after years of sacrifice. He also gave her an envelope with extra cash. For food, for clothes, for anything the children need while you're there. She tried to refuse it at first. "I don't want to take more than I need." "This isn't about need," he said. "It's about care." She finally accepted it, tucking the envelope into her worn handbag like a treasure. The night before her flight, Elias found her in the kitchen late, packing a small suitcase. She was folding clothes with the same precision she used for towels, but her movements were slower, heavier with emotion. "Will you be gone long?" he asked from the doorway. She looked up. "Until he's strong again." "Maybe 6 weeks," he nodded. "Take all the time you need. Your job will be here when you return." She smiled faintly. "You're very kind." "I'm learning," he admitted. They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Then she said, "Back home we have a saying. When one person carries water, the whole village drinks. You've carried water for my village, sir." He didn't know what to say to that. So he just said, "I hope Thabo runs faster than all the other boys when he's healed." She laughed. A real, warm sound he'd never heard before. "Oh, he will. And he'll tell everyone it was because a kind man far away believed in him." The next morning, a car took Grace to the airport. Elias watched from the window as she got in, suitcase in hand, face turned toward the rising sun. She didn't look back, but he knew she didn't need to. Something between them had shifted, something quiet, deep, and unbreakable. For the rest of the day, the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but also emptier in a way that surprised him. He realized how much her presence had been a steady rhythm in the background of his life, like the ticking of a clock he hadn't noticed until it stopped. That evening, instead of dining alone, he ordered takeout, simple food, nothing fancy, and ate at the kitchen table. As he chewed, he thought about Grace's rice, how she'd gone without so her grandchildren could have more, how she'd hidden her hunger so no one would pity her, how she'd still shown up every day, clean, calm, and capable even when her heart was breaking. He picked up his phone and dialed his foundation's director. "I want to start a new initiative," he said. "Focus on rural healthcare in South Africa, specifically Limpopo province. Mobile clinics, pediatric care, emergency transport, and education scholarships for children who've lost parents." There was a pause. "This is sudden, sir." "Not sudden," Elias replied. "Long overdue." He spent the next hour outlining his vision. No press releases, no photo ops, just real help delivered quietly, where it was needed most. He named the program after Grace's daughter, using the name Grace had whispered to him with so much love and grief. When he hung up, he walked outside. The garden was bathed in moonlight. The grass looked soft silver in the glow. He knelt down and touched a blade, remembering how Grace had held it in her hand just days ago, not as a last resort, but as a lifeline from her past. He didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside him had softened like soil after the first rain. He wasn't just a billionaire anymore. He was someone who'd been seen, and in seeing Grace had finally seen himself. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The days after Grace left felt longer than Elias expected. The house, usually a place of quiet order, now seemed too still, like a clock that had stopped ticking. He tried to fill the silence with work, but his mind kept drifting to Johannesburg. Was Thabo scared? Was Grace holding his hand right now? Had they found a place to stay near the hospital? He checked his email constantly, half hoping for a message, though he knew Grace wasn't much for writing. On the third day, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo. Thabo lying in a hospital bed wearing a small blue gown, smiling weakly at the camera. Next to him sat Grace, her hand resting gently on his forehead. The caption read, "Surgery tomorrow. He is brave. Thank you." Elias stared at the image for a long time. The boy looked small, too small for such a big fight, but there was a spark in his eyes. And Grace, she looked tired, but calm, like someone who had finally let go of a weight she'd carried for years. He didn't reply with words. He just typed, "You're both in my thoughts." Then he put the phone down and walked to the window, watching the garden sway in the evening breeze. The surgery happened the next morning. Elias didn't sleep much that night. He paced his study, made coffee at 3 a.m., and even called the clinic, only to be told they couldn't give updates to non-family. He understood, but it didn't ease the knot in his stomach. By late afternoon, another message came. This time, it was a short video. Thabo sitting up in bed holding a stuffed lion someone had given him. His voice was soft but clear. "Thank you, kind man. I will run fast now." Elias watched it 3 times. The third time he had to look away. Not because he was sad, but because something inside him cracked open, wide and warm like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He hadn't expected gratitude. He hadn't done it for that. But hearing those words from a child who'd never met him, it changed something deep in his bones. Over the next few weeks, updates came slowly but steadily. Thabo was healing well. He could walk short distances. He ate real food, porridge, vegetables, even a little meat. Grace sent photos of him laughing with his sisters, playing cards on the hospital bed, standing unassisted by the window. Each image felt like a gift, but Elias didn't just wait. He acted. He met with his foundation team in person for the first time in months. No virtual calls, no rushed agendas. He sat with them in a quiet room, coffee in hand, and said, "I want this to be real. Not just a name on a brochure. I want nurses on the ground. Ambulances that actually run. Schools with books that aren't falling apart." One of the younger staff members asked, "Why Limpopo? Why now?" Elias didn't mention Grace by name. He didn't need to. "Because someone showed me that help isn't about giving from the top down," he said. "It's about seeing people where they are and walking with them." They began planning immediately. Mobile health units equipped for children's emergencies, training for local community health workers, partnerships with schools to provide meals and tutoring, and scholarships not just for tuition but for uniforms, books, even bus fare. Elias insisted every detail be handled with respect. "No cameras," he said firmly. No speeches. Just dignity. Meanwhile, back in Johannesburg, Grace stayed by Thabo's side. The hospital staff treated her with kindness once they learned the surgery had been fully paid. A nurse even brought her a warm blanket when she fell asleep in the chair beside his bed. For the first time in years, Grace didn't feel like a burden. She felt seen. One afternoon, as Thabo napped, she stepped outside the hospital to call Elias. She found a quiet bench under a jacaranda tree, its purple flowers drifting down like soft rain. "He asked about you today," she said when he answered. "He wants to know if you have a garden like ours." Elias smiled. "I do, and I've planted something new." "What?" "Spinach. And beans. And tomatoes. I'm learning how to grow food, not just for beauty, but for eating." There was a pause. Then Grace laughed, a light, joyful sound. "You gardening?" "I'm terrible at it," he admitted. "But I'm trying." They talked for nearly an hour, about the weather, about the children's favorite foods, about how Thabo kept asking when he could run. Grace told him about the village, how the rains had finally come, how the goats were fat again. Elias listened, not as a billionaire, but as a friend. When they hung up, he went straight to the garden. He'd hired a local farmer to help redesign part of the estate, not as a showpiece, but as a working space. Rows of vegetables now grew where ornamental grasses once stood. The staff were invited to tend their own plots, take home fresh produce, even sell extras at a small weekend stand near the gate. The head gardener had been skeptical at first. "This isn't a farm, sir." But after seeing how happy the kitchen staff were harvesting their first zucchini, he'd changed his tune. Elias knelt in the soil that evening, hands dirty, shirt sleeves rolled up. He planted a row of kale, fumbling with the seedlings. A young housekeeper walked by, paused and smiled. "Need help, sir?" He looked up, surprised. "Sure." She knelt beside him, showing him how to space the plants so they'd grow strong. Her name was Amina, and she'd been with the household for 2 years. She'd never spoken more than 3 words to him before. "My grandmother grew kale in Kenya," she said as they worked. "She said it keeps you strong when times are hard." Elias nodded. "Grace told me something similar." Amina looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. "She's a good woman." "She is," he said, "and we've been lucky to have her." That night, over a simple dinner of roasted vegetables from the garden and rice, Elias realized something. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. People were talking more. In the kitchen, in the hallways, even in the garden. They weren't just staff. They were people with stories, with roots, with love to give. A week later, Grace called with big news. Thabo was being discharged. The doctor said he'd need checkups for a year, but his heart was healing. He could go home. Elias didn't hesitate. "I'll send a car to bring you to the airport. And I've arranged for a driver to meet you in Johannesburg. Someone who'll take you all the way to the village." "You don't have to do that," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." The day Grace returned, Elias didn't wait inside. He stood by the front gate as the car pulled up. The sun was high, the sky clear. The door opened and out stepped Grace, taller somehow, lighter. Behind her, holding her hand, was Thabo. The boy was small, yes, but his steps were steady. His eyes were bright. He wore new shoes and a shirt with a lion on it, the same one from the video. Grace saw Elias and stopped. She didn't bow. She didn't lower her eyes. She just smiled. "Welcome home," Elias said. Thabo looked up at him, curious. "Are you the kind man?" Elias knelt so he was at the boy's level. "I try to be." Thabo studied him for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone painted with a heart. "My sister made this for you. She says thank you for saving my heart." Elias took the stone carefully. It was warm from the boy's hand. "Tell her I'll keep it forever." Grace watched them, tears in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, quiet, proud tears. Inside the house, the staff had gathered in the hallway, not because they were told to, but because they'd heard Grace was back. When she walked in, they clapped softly, some hugging her, others touching her shoulder in silent welcome. Even the chef brought out a special meal, her favorite dish from home, something he'd researched and practiced for days. Elias stood back, watching. He didn't belong in the center of this moment, and he didn't want to. This was Grace's homecoming, her victory. Later that evening, as the sun set, he found her in the garden again. this time not eating grass but watering the new vegetable beds. Thabo was nearby chasing butterflies with one of the gardener's children. "He's strong," Elias said, joining her. "He is," she said, "because people like you chose to care." "No," Elias corrected gently, "because people like you never stopped caring even when no one was watching." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not just gratitude, but trust. They stood in silence as the sky turned gold, then pink, then deep blue. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale began to sing, and in that quiet moment, Elias understood. Wealth wasn't in bank accounts or buildings. It was in moments like this when one person's pain is seen and another chooses to stand beside them. Not above, not below, just beside. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the money in the world. 6 months had passed since Thabo came home. The garden at the estate no longer looked like a display from a luxury magazine. It had changed, softened, deepened, become alive in a way Elias never imagined possible. Rows of spinach, kale, tomatoes, and beans now grew where perfectly trimmed hedges once stood. Wooden signs labeled each plot in neat handwriting. Amina's greens, Carlos's peppers, Grace's herbs. Even the children of the staff had small patches, tiny squares of earth where they planted sunflowers or strawberries, their names written in crayon on popsicle sticks. Elias walked through the garden every morning now, not to inspect, but to learn. He'd traded his loafers for old boots, his crisp shirts for worn cotton. He still didn't know much about farming, but he was getting better. He'd learned that beans need support to climb, that tomatoes ripen faster with morning sun, and that the best way to know if kale is ready is to taste a leaf. Bitter at first, but sweet after rain. One Saturday morning, he found Grace teaching his young niece how to plant seeds. The girl, 8 years old, curious and bright, knelt in the dirt beside her, hands covered in soil, eyes wide with wonder. "Like this?" the girl asked, pressing a seed into the earth. "Gently," Grace said, her voice warm, not too deep, just enough to feel safe. Elias watched from a few steps away, not wanting to interrupt. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light on their backs. Thabo was nearby, actually running, chasing a soccer ball with 2 other boys. His laughter rang out, clear and strong, the kind of sound that makes your chest feel full without knowing why. He remembered the first time he'd seen Grace in this very spot. Crouched low, eating grass out of quiet desperation. Now she was standing tall, teaching a child how to grow food, how to care for something small and fragile until it becomes strong. The difference wasn't just in the garden. It was in her eyes, in the way she held her shoulders, in the ease of her smile. He walked over slowly. Grace saw him and nodded but didn't stop her lesson. "Now cover it," she told the girl, "and say a little thank you to the earth." The girl did as she was told, then looked up at Elias. "Uncle, can I grow carrots next?" "You can grow anything you want," he said, smiling. Grace stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "She's a quick learner." "She has a good teacher," Elias replied. They walked together toward the edge of the garden where a small bench sat under a fig tree. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the children play. "The clinic in Limpopo opened last week," Elias said after a while. 3 mobile units are already on the road. They've seen over 200 children in the first month." Grace's eyes softened. "I heard. My sister sent a message. She said a little boy with a fever was taken to the city in one of your ambulances. He's fine now." "He's fine because people like your sister knew where to go," Elias said. "We just made the path a little easier." She looked at him, then really looked at him. "You've changed," he didn't deny it. "So have I," she smiled. "You used to walk through this house like it was a museum. Now you live in it." He laughed quietly. "Turns out a house isn't a home until people feel safe enough to be themselves in it." They talked for a long time, about the scholarship program named after her daughter, about how 3 girls from her village had already been accepted into secondary school, about how Thabo now dreamed of becoming a doctor. "He says he wants to fix hearts like the ones that fixed his," Grace said, voice thick with pride. Later that afternoon, Elias gathered the staff in the garden, not for an announcement but for a meal. They'd cooked together, stew made with homegrown vegetables, rice, fresh bread, and fruit salad. Tables were set under string lights, chairs borrowed from the patio. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. As they ate, people shared stories about their families, their childhoods, their hopes. Amina talked about her grandmother's recipes. Carlos spoke about teaching his son to fish back in Guatemala. Grace told a story about how, as a girl, she'd climbed the tallest baobab tree in her village just to see the sunrise. Elias listened more than he spoke. And for the first time, he didn't feel like the owner of the house. He felt like part of something bigger, a community, stitched together not by money but by shared humanity. After dinner, as the stars began to appear, Thabo ran up to him, breathless. "Come see," he said, grabbing Elias's hand. He led him to the far corner of the garden where a small wooden box sat on a post. Inside were dozens of smooth stones, each painted with a different symbol: a heart, a sun, a bird, a tree. "What's this?" Elias asked. "My thank you box," Thabo said proudly. "Everyone who helps our family puts a stone here. My sister painted them. That one," he pointed to a blue stone with a star, "is yours." Elias picked it up. It was cool and smooth, the paint careful and bright. "Why a star?" "Because you shined when we were in the dark," the boy said simply. Elias could